Well, in the aftermath of Super Typhoon Haiyan, relief organizations called in the international community to help and donate funds for disaster relief. Now, many countries have already answered that call. So far, the Australians are leading the charge when it comes to humanitarian funding. They have donated more than $28 million. The U.S. has donated more than $27 million in direct relief aid. The United Kingdom, just over $24 million. And the United Arab Emirates, along with the Japanese, have pitched in $10 million each for relief and aid. Well, of course, there's been a lot of frustration and some criticism about the relief efforts in the Philippines. Survivors still describe conditions there as horrific. Many have gone days now without water and food. Joining us now is Lieutenant General Russel. Honore, thank you so much. You have basically been credited for turning around that initial botched response to Hurricane Katrina and getting things moving there on the ground. What did we learn during Hurricane Katrina, and how is it being implemented here in the Philippines?
Well, number one, you have to move with speed. And the old saying, you have to have a need for speed, which trumps everything else. And you have to collaborate and coordinate with everyone. And you have to get communications on the ground to all the outlying areas so the government can get reconnected. Because until the people can talk to each other, you can't work in a collaborative way. The other one is to get the government to set a priority. What is the priority? The priority has to be saving lives. And in the process of doing that, it has to be focused on food, water, medicine, and evacuation of the critically injured or ill people. And that has to be played out on the ground. You know, you're still seeing C-130 aircrafts coming in there. Anywhere a C-130 can land, you can land a C-17. You got to get bigger aircraft in there so you can get more people that are lives that are threatened, to include young babies that may be ill or have immune problems, and get them out of the area, because trying to sustain them while you're still doing search and rescue won't work.
And as we just heard in Joey Chen's report, there is still a need for search and rescue on the ground there, yet you heard from some families very concerned about the well-being of their children. They want to evacuate and they simply can't get out. Is that a problem right now you see in this response?
Well, it was a problem, and it's a problem at every disaster. And this is not, you can't turn the switch and this gets solved. It's a function of capacity to get those airfields so you can get bigger aircraft in there and evacuate people out, the most vulnerable population, and then continue your search and rescue. But at the same time, you need medicine and you need to evacuate people. So you have to have a balance in what you're doing, because there's still people that have not been touched. There's still people waiting for any help in terms of food and water. And the clock is running. You know, many times people start thinking calendar. And as I remind my troops in Louisiana, we're dealing with a watch, not a calendar.
You know, you're meeting with FEMA to talk about some things that you recently observed while you were in Cuba, about the way Cuba is doing response to natural disasters. Here we are now looking at developing nations like the Philippines. What did you see there in Cuba that they could be doing there in the Philippines?
I made 3 trips to Cuba because we went to study how a developing country that doesn't have a FEMA, doesn't have private insurance, how do they withstand these hurricanes? And one of the things they do, they teach preparedness in their schools, from elementary through high schools. They do real evacuation drills. And when the government give a warning that a hurricane's coming, they send cars out to go pick people up who are on dialysis. They pick up all the pregnant women and babies under 30 days old and evacuate them before the storm comes. And then they send trucks in, army trucks, to evacuate people, because people know if they don't evacuate, there's no insurance and there's no FEMA the next day. So they put their television, their mattress, and their refrigerator on the truck, and they evacuate out.
Isn't that amazing? And some of these things aren't even happening here in the U.S. You saw something really good happening on the ground there in Cuba.
The other thing the Cubans have is the Henry Reeve Medical Brigade, about 2,500 medical people that can deploy within hours anywhere in the world. And that's another capacity, I think, that we need to organize around the UN and the U.S. and other nations to have a capacity where we can fly in a couple thousand docs and medical people with equipment. They come in just like an airborne brigade, and they can solve a problem.
Let's bring into the conversation here Ben Smilowitz. He's Executive Director of the Disaster Accountability Project. Ben, you've been a whistleblower before over bad responses to storms, Hurricane Katrina, the initial response there you were highly critical of. What are you seeing so far in the Philippines? What are the big challenges right now that you see with all of these aid groups that are trying to head there and provide help?
We saw some of the aid groups earlier in the segment, and you've got really dedicated, really sometimes skilled people that go in to help out, and that's great. The problem is that sometimes you have 100 generals moving in at the same time. And I think the general here could probably say that you don't need 100 generals, you probably need just a few. And when the public in the U.S. and around the world want to help after these disasters, sometimes it's really important to figure out which groups have the greatest capacity to deliver services, which are plugged in to Philippines-based organizations. Because at the end of the day, the Philippines, they've prepared for disasters before. They have lots of typhoons there. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that need to prepare for the next one. So if all these groups rush in and take over, then they're going to inhibit the response, and they're also going to prevent the Philippines from improving next time.
Yeah, there's no shortage of people right now on the internet asking for money right now so they can go there and provide help. Could all of these people actually provide help, or does it actually create some problems on the ground if you have so many people going in there? Either one of you guys chime in on that. General,
Go ahead.
your thoughts.
It's certainly a challenge, but you know, good intentions. I think some people need to wait till you get to recovery, because in search and rescue, every helicopter, every aircraft going in there need to take food, water, and medicine. And on the way out, it need to be carrying people, that the vulnerable population, that need to get to a place where they can be cared for. I don't see how you can continue to move enough supplies there by air to sustain the hundreds of thousands of people. They're going to have to be some type of a mass evacuation until you can get some of the infrastructure back up, like electricity and water. Even if you're taking water purification units in, it's going to take days, because then you can't distribute the water. So they've got a tough problem on the hand. Nothing I'm saying is easy, but the priority of work is going to have to be set. The good news is the president of the country is there. We've all seen if you don't handle a disaster right, it can be disruptive to that government.
And if you don't spend the money appropriately with that's pouring into that country right now, that could be a big problem, as we obviously saw after the earthquake in Haiti.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of Philippines-based organizations that are responding, and the question is how quickly will these outside international groups move money and resources to the Philippines organizations so they can actually deliver services the way that they've planned.
Otherwise, what, that money sits in some bank account and looks good for some charity, but it's not actually getting to the people on the ground?
We saw after Sandy, there was a lot of money sitting around later on in the game, and that was just last year. We saw after the Haiti earthquake, literally half the funds were sitting in the bank after a year. And it doesn't necessarily mean that money has to move fast as like a general rule, but if services are needed on the ground and you've got money and resources in the bank, you've got to move those money and resources.
Final thoughts, gentlemen. What do we need to do in order to better prepare the world with these storms happening? One of the things you mentioned was technology, wasn't it?
Well, better technology, being able to communicate after the electricity go out, satellite communications in all these villages, that's a must. It should happen. And we live in a new normal. You know, the Philippines are our allies. If somebody had told us 10 days ago that a foreign army was going to attack Tacloban and it might destroy or kill 1,000 people, the entire Pacific Fleet would have been assembled and went that way. Mm-hmm. You know, when we see things like typhoons and we see things like tsunamis going, we've got to start moving, because the first rule of warfare is to get there. This is a war. When you get attacked by Mother Nature that can kill thousands of people, we've got to respond quicker. So we've got to treat it just like if somebody was going to attack one of our allies, and start moving. And we've got to stop waiting for people to ask for help.
General Honore and Ben Smilowitz, both of you guys, thank you so much for joining us here in the studio tonight.